All right, so we are live, and tonight I'm here with Cory Stevens. He's a VSH queen breeder from Missouri. What part of Missouri are you from?
Southeast Missouri.
Southeast. Okay.
Yep.
Um, and he breeds VSH bees, Varroa sensitive hygiene. So tonight we're going to start with, what are Varroa? What do they do? Here we are. So, what are the damaging effects of Varroa mites? So, how do they damage the bees?
Well, they're feeding on their. They used to think it was. They would just say hemolymph, which is like bees' blood.
Yeah.
They thought they were just feeding on that, but then I think it was Sammy Ramsey figured out that they were feeding on the fat bodies.
Yeah.
So the fat stores of the bees, they're piercing the bee. It's usually underneath their abdominal plate, and so you got an open wound. Obviously, that's not good. Yeah, opens them up to infection. Plus, they're eating their food stores. And it's kind of worse than that because bees' fat body is kind of their, I think it acts like their liver or their, it has immune function too. So, not good. Plus,
No.
they'll whenever if you can think of it like a tick biting you. I'm sure you guys probably have ticks in Maine.
Plenty of them. Yes. Yeah.
So, same concept. It's just like, would be like a tick to us, would be a Varroa to bee. But, like we can get Lyme disease from ticks. Bees can get all kinds of viruses from mites. So that's the most damaging aspects of them is just the effects of parasitism.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't really understand. Like, for me, in my head, I always saw it as the mites, feeding off the winter bees, and that's what was really causing the issues. But the longer I've been a beekeeper in these past 6 months, have really changed my mind on that, and I really realized it's the viruses are the killers.
Yep,
Yeah.
big time, absolutely. Because I mean, you can tell. I would notice some back before I was using a lot of VSH stock. You could just tell they're getting chewed up. Have you ever seen parasitic mite syndrome or withered wings?
I saw a little bit in some of my colonies, I think,
Yeah,
but our season's so short that I'm pretty on the ball with mites. Like, we get our winter bees made in like August or early September.
yeah,
So I got to be treating in like July and early August, or
yeah,
I'm screwed. So
yeah. You got to stay ahead of it. Yeah, but if people haven't seen it, it's like if you see a bee and their wings look like two little pieces of yarn. I mean, they can't fly; they won't go
yeah,
anywhere. That's what we were talking about as far as parasitic mite syndrome. Most people call it deformed wing virus
yeah,
specifically, but there's all kinds of viruses they can transmit.
yeah. Those viruses are the killers. I mean, that those bees are pretty much useless to the entire hive. It's just, do we know how long those viruses persist via like the bees spreading it to each other?
Well, I mean, Zach Lamas and some of them were showing that even if they're doing like hygienic removal or feeding other bees, that they can pass it back and forth.
Yeah,
So, I mean, until you get rid of the Varroa to where they're not getting the viruses, which is hard to do because they just come right back.
yeah, makes
But
sense.
that's one aspect of I think of the VSH bees is they have I feel like strong viral resistance. So, like in the past, I would requeen a colony that had parasitic mite syndrome or withered wings, and like in 6 weeks or so, 7 weeks, they would clear it. But it's weird because how they do that is I think they're detecting that something's wrong with the brood, like the brood's sick, and they chuck it outside. That's the hygienic function of it. So I think that's how they're getting rid of the viruses on a colony level. Because, like I said, whenever Zach did his research, it showed that any kind of trophallaxis you can spread viruses.
That's going to be happening everywhere all the time, right? It's just,
Constantly, yeah.
uh,
Yes,
you know,
that's the only way to break the virus cycle is to control the mites or use something that's really hygienic towards that ejects the virus from the colony. That's kind of your two options.
yeah, it's
Or
hard
both.
to, yeah. Go ahead.
I just said or both. That
Oh
would
yeah.
work.
Oh, oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just hard to even imagine how much damage they do and how many bills that, like, probably millions of bees they kill every year, even just in the U.S. alone. Like, the scale is massive, and it's really a large problem to say the least.
Oh yeah, because every time that the colony is making brood, so that's the problem is the bigger a colony is and the more
Yeah.
robust, which that's the ones you're gonna make the most honey off of. That's the ones you want. But in the warm season, whenever they're making tons of brood, they're making tons of mites too,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, I had so my cell builder and also the hive that produced two supers of honey. They so I never got a test in because I was so worried because it was like, I don't know, it was like July 15th ish. And so I looked in and I was like, this doesn't look right. It looked like some crinkly wings, like something was just off. And
Mhm.
so I looked for the queen, I couldn't find her. And so I just went ahead and treated them, but it was with formic acid, which I've had a lot of success with. And
Good.
even when I came back a few weeks later after the treatment and I tested them, they still tested like two mites. So my guess is they were, north of 15 or so, somewhere in that. Yeah. So I should have looked on the bottom board. I bet it was carnage, but
Yeah.
it's just like those biggest colonies, they know how to farm those mites, get them going.
Absolutely. What kind of honey do you make up that way? You mentioned making a couple supers.
Yeah, so I did about 230 pounds this year. It's mostly white Dutch clover, and we have this little like odd plant. It's not very common that I've seen on YouTube, but it's called bird's foot truffle. It's like
Yeah.
this little yellow flower,
Hmm.
and I can't see it on any honey bee net forage maps or anything big, but boy, do the bees love it for a
Oh
few
yeah.
weeks of the year. Yeah.
Yep. I've heard of it. I don't know if unless I don't know if we I don't know if I have it on my farm was what I was gonna say. But I mean some people will seed it because I think it's a legume, like clover, it puts nitrogen in the soil. So it's a positive
Yeah.
plant in that regard too. But yeah, that's awesome. The bees really like it.
All right. So, Cory, what does VSH mean? The burning question. Everyone's got to know.
Burning question. VSH is a term that the USDA bee scientists coined whenever they figured out that it's called Varroa sensitive hygiene. So basically, the bees are targeting, like if you've got brood, a frame of brood developing young
Yep.
bees, they'll go through, I guess it's an olfactory, like they'll smell and find it, open it up, and the ones that have reproductive mites in there, they just take the whole pupa out and throw it outside. So it
Wow.
breaks the mite's life cycle. And, there's varying levels of it. It could be half your colony has it and half doesn't, depending on the drones and whatnot. But, if you've got a noticeable amount in it, they'll keep the Varroa reproduction super low. So maybe I got too abstract there, but
No, I think that's, yeah.
basically it stands for Varroa sensitive hygiene. And it's not a breed of bee. So like some people like Italian, some people like carnies, some people, it's not like all types of honeybees can have it, or you can breed it into them. So it's just a
Yeah.
trait set. It's just a set of genes basically.
So so I could, basically what you're saying is I could make my own Carney line of VSHs.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you said it's an additive trait, right? That's the way you say it.
It is, yeah. So once you get it in a population and and select for it, you get your levels up. I think you'll have less Varroa issue, less viral issue. You still
Yeah.
need to keep an eye on them. It's not like they're
Yeah.
mite proof. That's not it at all. But they actively suppress mite reproduction, so they should have lower levels of mites. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's a positive thing in my book. So yeah, you could stick it in, a carny population in Maine. You could. I've had Italian bees. A lot of people when they think about Italians, they just think they couldn't handle mites. But if you have Italian lines that are selected for VSH, they're really mite tolerant.
Yeah. Um, how do you, I've heard you talk about your own stocks. You said they're not, you said they're pretty calm for the most part, and you've been breeding with that as best as you can. How would you describe them in the spring? Are they closer to an Carniolan or an Italian as far as buildup goes? Would
I
you?
think they're I don't know. I would almost say, and the thing is, I don't have a bunch of other people's bees to compare.
Yeah, it's hard to know. Yeah.
You know, I mean, they respond like whenever nectar and pollen kicks in, like they respond with growing their
Yeah.
population. They don't, but I mean, some of the lines I've crossed with, like John Harbo's line, it was really high VSH scores, but I felt like it built a little bit slower.
Yeah.
But the stock that I've been messing with, I feel like just responds faster. They grow quicker. But
Yeah.
the downside of that is, you know, some of them may use more honey stores. I mean, some of them, a lot of my bees, I don't have to feed them a lot. You know, occasionally I'll run across one that, you
Yeah.
know, just for some reason, I don't know if they started making brood earlier or what, but they just burn up honey quicker.
Yeah.
But
Do you notice during the dearth? And they like I Russians are infamous for like just stopping brooding. How do they do during the dearth? Do you notice that kind of
they'll
behavior?
shut down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, will they, you know, some of them may not be as quick as Rush. I don't know. I haven't messed with a lot of
Yeah.
Russians. There's certain kinds of bees that as soon as the nutrition shuts off, I mean, yeah, they're like a, you know, a Honda Civic. They get really good fuel mileage. You know, you've got others. It's always a trade-off, though.
Yeah.
You know, what do you want? Because the big colonies that have a lot of brood are going to make a lot of honey too whenever the honey flow hits. And if you're making splits, you got brood for splits. So I think it's just being somewhere in the middle where it's not really slow, but they're not swarming like
Yeah.
immediately, you know, because
Yeah.
they're so big too. I don't know. How about yours? What would you say your bees? How do they act?
I'd say I've been pretty blessed as far as temperament goes. Like I've only ever had one hive that I consider mean, and
Yeah.
we're not talking Bruce's bees. We're talking
Yeah.
like not that bad, but pretty bad.
Yeah.
Um, so they're pretty calm and relatively frugal. I want to encourage the Russian buckfast carniolan tendencies, so I don't have to feed as much because it's just costing me money to
Oh, yeah.
if I can encourage those kind of smaller winter clusters, I'd prefer that. Because like I only had 18 hives last fall, and I fed like 600 pounds of sugar.
Yeah. It
So
gets expensive.
I wanna focus on bringing that up. I haven't had a lot of swarming, but I'm always in my colonies and I'm always splitting them, so it's not really a coincidence why.
Yeah.
Um, and I've made some honey. I mean, it's really hard to judge so far whether they're productive or not, because I don't have a lot to base it off of yet. But
Yeah. I understand that. Yeah, and it just depends on your area. Because whenever I first got bees, the area that I was in, either it wasn't very productive or my bees weren't, or both.
yeah,
But I mean, it seemed like once I moved, you could tell it was, you know, it's different wherever you go to. But I don't really move my bees around a lot now.
yeah. How many yards do you have?
I've got 3 yards now. I'm about to consolidate them into two, and then I'll probably open a different one from where I have one of them. So I'd had bees there in the past. It was on my family's place, but it just doesn't seem like it's what it used to be. You know, I don't know what's different about it. If it's the forage changed a little bit. I don't know.
Like your honey crop, you mean, or
Yeah, it seems to be less productive. And then it seems like if you have an area that's less productive, you'll have more loss out of it too, just because they're not eating as good. You know, like Kamen talks about nutrition all the time, and it's
nutrition
key.
is everything?
It
Yeah,
doesn't matter if they're really mite resistant if
yeah,
they're starving to death.
yeah. That's not
But
really.
yeah,
Yeah. So it's really interesting. I'm not sure if this is the case, but I kind of hear some rumblings from other beekeepers. So I started in 2018, and I heard like they had a lot of successive good honey seasons before I started. And we've been generally on a drought for the past 5 years. It's not been a severe drought. We're not talking California level drought, but there's been a couple droughty summers. Um, and I don't know if that has anything to do with the honey production that I've had. It could, maybe we're just having worse honey seasons than we were 5 years ago. But
it could
um,
be. It seems to ebb and flow sometimes, though. Too. Maybe it's just like you said. Maybe it's just exceptionally dry.
yeah,
And your area gets more rainfall, it might have a dramatic difference. Because
Yeah.
like that kind of determines when I stop raising queens too. Because around June here, if it starts drying up, it's odd. I say that. I used to say it when, as soon as it starts drying up, they'll not want to make queens. But this last year, we got a maybe it's because we had so much rain before, I guess. It dried up, but then they just kept it was I don't know, something was still blooming. So every year is slightly different. And then I stopped raising queens. And then of course after I stopped, came and calls and was like, hey, I need queen cells. So I'm like, oh, here we go. I cold stopped, and had to cold start again. But it was good. I'm glad he got to try some because I wanted him to try some of our bees.
Good marketing. I mean, you got out to a lot of people.
Yeah. For sure, but not just that. Like, looking forward in my breeding program, the downside of it, I would say, is like I don't have a bazillion hives. I run like 120, 150 colonies. But if you network with people that are running your stock and then, maybe do some trading with them, like, some that they open mated that did really well. And then I feel like it's like a network breeding instead of one guy, and whatever colonies he has, you have, a lot more. So that's in the dream state. It hasn't met reality yet, but a couple of my buddies are doing that this year. So I guess it kind of has. We've kicked off.
Yeah. So you said I've heard about this on some of your other videos and streams. So you're going to be sending commercial beekeepers your stock. They're going to run them however they want, and then the most productive ones they're going to send back to you to then have the Varroa testing on it, right?
Yep. And I'll do the Varroa testing on it, and then that way it'll be a wider net.
Yeah.
A couple of them just left today with one of my buddies. They're headed to warmer weather. He's got a place down in Mississippi, so they'll get an early start.
Cheers to that.
Yeah, I know. I wish I could. So what do you think? Like, what's your plans for this year? Are you wanting to expand or stay the same or do more queen rearing, or what do you think?
All the above. Yeah, all the above. So I started rearing queens in 2021 from Cayman's videos. That's how I got started doing it. And I failed in 2020, but I tried it again in 2021. It was successful. So I've sold 10 queens in 2021. Then I sold, then I sold 30 last year.
Wow.
And then this year I currently have 15 of the 18 that I sent into winter. And my goal is to sell 40 queens, harvest 300 pounds of honey, and split up to 25 hives plus 5 nukes. That's my goals.
Nice. That's a pretty good goal. To do it. If you're raising your own queens, that's the biggest part of it. I feel like, because if you're having to buy from somebody else, their timeline may not. Theirs, and I just feel like I like to hear that you're doing that because I feel like that's the real key to sustainability and being able to expand. And because it seemed like it was an expensive hobby for me until I learned queen rearing, and then it opens up a lot.
So it's really interesting. Like for me, I haven't bought a queen since 2020 and I love it. I haven't spent $1 on them. I'll take it.
Also, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, not to mention you can pick from your favorites too.
Yeah.
So you might have your own unique little line of bees up there. That's amazing. Because, people talk about inbreeding and stuff. If everybody gets all their stock from one spot, potentially so. But if you're doing your thing up there, everybody is doing the same, then, it's not an issue at all.
Exactly. So here's a question for you. Do you see more brood and capping on drones or worker bees?
I would say more so workers, but I see it a lot in drones too. Like whenever they figured out how to test for VSH, like they for some reason they specifically said worker brood. But I mean, you think about it, mites love drone brood. So
absolutely, yeah.
You'd want I think you'd want them to be able to work drones as well. But I would say I could be wrong. Maybe it's because there's so much more worker brood. It just seems like they pay attention to that. But I have tons of pictures of my bees where they uncap exactly like Amir is asking, uncap and check it, Sometimes they'll leave it open. Sometimes they'll try to recap it, and it's funny if they recap it. A lot of times you can see pieces of their eye sticking through the cap. It's almost like they just
Yeah.
stuck pieces and did a halfway job.
And have you heard about like after swarms? What they'll do is there'll be these little holes in like the sides of the queen cells, and that's the bees like feeding and watering the queen, the virgin queen, through the queen cell to like tell her to stay put, and they'll like buzz the cell before the next after swarm leaves because they want to keep that one for later.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's kind of similar idea. So next, I wanted to talk about unhealthy brood odor. So can you explain that for us?
Yeah, there's well, we talked about VSH, and there's an element of hygiene to it. So like they're smelling something's wrong in that brood, and they're uncapping it, and more often than not, it's a reproductive mite or they're sick. Well, unhealthy brood odor. Kara Wagner at University of North Carolina, Greensboro, I believe. She found that I don't know how they did it. This is some scientific amazingness. But they went in and like synthesized basically the smell of unhealthy brood that they feel like triggers those bees to throw them out. And so they like fake the bees out. They spray just a little bit of that on the comb and see if the bees uncap it or not. Just like that previous question, which is a great question, asking about uncapping.
Yeah.
That's what's so cool about UBO, and it's new, so everybody's chattering about it and getting excited. But I have to admit, I get to test it this year. I don't think it's going to be available.
Lucky duck.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'll get to test that in June on our bees, and then I think next year you can buy this on the market. And if you want to test your bees, so say if you've got, you don't want to test all your bees.
Yeah, just your best ones. Yeah.
Yeah, just your best ones. With the ones you want to breed from, your favorites, you could test them and see who's got the highest level of hygiene. It's like hygiene on steroids, I think.
Yeah. So
it's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds pretty futuristic. Yeah, I've heard about it, but I mean, so you said commercially available, hopefully in 2024.
Yep.
And do you know any idea of the cost or like even how much you need, that kind of stuff?
Generalized, like I know, if you're doing trials, and they're not producing a whole bunch of them, it's typically more expensive. But whenever it hits the market, I thought she said they wanted to be between 15 and 20 bucks a test. Now that may be per colony. I had that question. I think it's a one-shot deal. So, and somebody was like, I run thousands of hives. That would cost a fortune. But like we said earlier, like don't test everything. Pick your favorite.
I mean,
test just the ones and then prioritize the ones that have the highest scores. But Go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off.
It's well worth it. Like if I bought, if it's $60 to test 3 hives and I get to choose my breeder queen off that, I don't see how that wouldn't be worth it.
Definitely. Well, we talked about what you mentioned earlier, how bad the viruses are. Varroa. She said the same thing. That's what really caught my attention because I'd noticed that working with VSH bees. But she said the bees that had high UBO scores, lower mites, had less mites, way lower viral loads, which that's a positive thing. And then she said they had a better chance of survival, which if they're controlling the viruses and mites, of course they have a better chance of survival, which it was cool because she proved that scientifically. Data, which is awesome.
It's really interesting. Like, I mean, bees are fascinating and mites are just one piece of the puzzle, but there's just infinite amount of knowledge to be learned about it. And it's a rabbit hole that never ends.
Yeah, there's no bottom to it. Well, even any tiny aspect of it, like if you want to look at the plants that bees are on, it's different from year to year. You know what I mean? So it changes. Or you want to look at breeding. Sue Kobe taught me how to do an instrumental insemination and stuff, and she's like, she said, bee breeding is a path with no end. Like you fix one thing and something else is empty, and it's just you're just constantly working with a population, so keeps it interesting.
Yeah, it's just it's infinite. Like so I don't know if you've seen Bob's videos, but Bob, I think it was like Two River Queens or
Oh
something
yeah,
like that.
true. Yep.
He did a video with him, and I really like watching complicated bee stuff on YouTube, but that went right over my head. It was too much for me. I
Yeah,
was pretty lost. I watched all the videos, but I was definitely got lost. I mean,
yeah, and Lou's super. He's really good at that stuff. He's super smart. Um, it's not for everybody. You can really do so much with just open mating and selection that I mean, it's so complicated that it takes a lot of payoff, and I think people are interested in it, but I would just say make sure it's a good fit before you jump in.
yeah, it's definitely not easy.
No.
So Cayman's looking forward to letting you figure it out and telling him how it works. So typical Cayman, expecting more of others than himself, but
That sounds good, Cayman. Well, I'll know more about it by June. I'll have it. You know how I say I like to speak from experience, not from
yeah.
theory. So it's
Yep.
theory now. In June, I'll have some experience. So I'll report back.
All right, sounds good. So I have plenty of other stuff. Or yeah, here I saw a comment. So what time of year, Corey, do you start raising VSH queens? Do you sell virgins, mated, both? What's yeah?
Great question. It's going to be different wherever you're at. I'm in Southeast Missouri, so people probably don't know where Bloomfield is. I'm west of Bloomfield in God's country. I'm about 45 minutes southwest of Cape Girardeau. If you haven't heard of Cape Girardeau, I'm just a little less than 3 hours south of St. Louis to give you an
Yeah,
idea of where I'm at.
yeah,
And usually, I start grafting the first or second week of April. Some of my buddies will start a little bit earlier than me, but I really like to see those bees wanting to swarm, at least your first big colonies. So really, I'm shipping queens mid-April through mid-June, sometimes a little
yeah.
bit later. That's my season anyway. And then sometimes you can do August queens uh, if you have a good fall flow, but it seems to me like it's a lot harder to get your queens established and get them fed to where they'll make it through the winter. Like it's easier to do it earlier in the year, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I did one round of grafting not during the flow, and I was not happy. It was
No,
not good.
it just doesn't work out well. I just think
No.
they're not in the mood for it. And if you kind of line up to where the bees, there's a good flow coming in, or
Yeah,
especially if there's swarms hanging around, you
yeah.
know, the best cell builders are the hives right before that swarm hanging in the tree leaves. Those are the best. They
That's
already
that's what
want
you're
queens.
that's what you're trying to mimic. That's the whole point
Right.
of queen rearing. All the principles are just like a swarm. How did because those create the best queens. So how do we replicate that?
And they already
And
want swarm, so it's
yeah,
easy to coax them. But I do
as
sell virgin queen. I don't sell open mated any longer. Um, anyway, and I sell some artificially inseminated queens. What
yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just
Okay.
gonna ask what you were gonna say. I
Oh,
thought.
yeah. Yeah. So Jack River Honey, he called them supercharged cell builders, I think was his word for them.
Oh yeah,
So yeah. They you pull out the queen and then you drop grafts and then the successive rounds will be better since they don't have any open brood, right?
yeah. If you're looking at it, because I look at it I have a day job too, so I take off every Monday. I'm grafting on Mondays, so
Yeah.
it's a weekly schedule. So the first time, like you said, I find a hive that's wanting to swarm, take the old queen out. You can keep her in a split or whatever if you want, and then I'll take those cells out too and add the grafts. Then I come back next week, and you want to make sure there's no cells, or
Yeah.
it'll rain on your parade. So take those out. Yeah, then your take will go.
Yeah, way up.
Damon talking about it.
I see like my first time I definitely like I got some queen cells in it and I was shocked when like I came back, I saw like the bees had taken my grafts, but there were a couple larvae that they had turned into queen cells. I have been lucky not to get any virgins hatching
Really?
before yet.
That's
But I know what's going to happen. It's going to break my heart, and it's going to be so frustrating. At some point, it's going to happen to me. But thus far, I've escaped it.
it'll break
Yeah,
your heart, but you'll learn something. So every time you look at that, don't look at it just as a hard. You'll learn something.
yeah. So, got some other questions to talk about here. Um, so, on some of your other interviews, you talked about SMRs, suppressed mite reproduction, and VSH. Can you just explain a little bit about the difference and how they were classified?
Yeah, and if it depends on who you're talking to. There's some scientists
Yeah.
that don't agree with what I'm about to say, but my opinion, I'm going to say it anyway.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, I don't like to speak from theory. I like to speak from experience. So here's been my understanding, and here's my experience. So whenever they first found VSH, they didn't know exactly what it was, but they
Yeah.
knew somehow the bees were shutting down mites reproduction. That's all they knew. So they called it suppressed mite reproduction,
Yeah.
or SMR.
Yeah.
They didn't know how it was working. They just knew the mites were
It's
coming
working.
in,
Yeah.
but they weren't making babies. Okay. So once they figured out how they were suppressing mite reproduction, it was because, like I mentioned, they'll smell the cell, they'll know something's wrong, or there's a mama mite in there that's having babies, reproducing. So they could detect that, and they would throw the pupa out so it breaks the life cycle. And that's a hygienic mechanism. So they changed it from SMR to VSH. So the scientific community has been wrestling around with SMR, and people are going different ways. But
Yeah.
here's what I say: SMR is integral to VSH, because whenever you're measuring VSH, you're technically calculating the percentage of suppressed mite reproduction. So your level of suppressed mite reproduction gives you a VSH score technically. Like you're just picking out a bunch of pupa. You have a sample size, which I can send you the link to that. Like if you get
Yeah.
on John Harbo's website, he's the USDA bee scientist that figured all this stuff out. It's not something I came up with on my own. This is all John's work. Well, he released that assay. I was
Yeah.
in his breeding group, so he taught us how to do it, and then he put it on his website so anybody could do it, which is very awesome of him, I have to say.
Yeah, I'll link that. I did skim it because it was linked in Bruce's video. It doesn't seem that complicated.
It's
How
not.
reason? Yeah. How like? Do you need any fancy tools to be able to do a Harbo assay?
No, you need like fine forceps. You can use regular tweezers, but you just make more of a mess. With those sharp ones, you can just pierce the cap and do a little circle motion and see if it's the right edge you want to pull out, because you have to count how many you're doing too. Have you seen those? I don't know what you call it. It's an articulating arm, but this part right here is magnified, and then it's got a big
Yeah.
LED halo light. You can get them
Yeah.
off Amazon, or I got one at Home Depot. Those work really well, and I use you don't have to use this, but I use a grafting frame. Like one of the Kelly B ones, like they used to have. I don't know if you've seen them. It holds your frame, and then you've got a little slot right here to hold your
Yeah.
cell bar and cup, so you can put your pupae there and count them. I use one of those. You don't have to have that, and you really don't have to have that LED halo light, but you probably need a headlamp and probably some magnification.
Yeah.
And
Because
so
I would definitely be interested in doing it because I think it's something feasible, though. It may be challenging at first. Yeah.
yeah, and it'll take a little bit of time, but a lot of people think it's a horrible,
Yeah.
long, terrible thing, but really, like, I mean, I've done several, so I'm fairly quick, but I can do a frame in like 13 minutes or so. If it's a normal sample size, sometimes you have to double it though. And,
Yeah.
that's going to take 26 minutes approximately.
So when talking about these assays, so I believe when I was skimming the Harbo assay, you basically take 100 100 cells and you pull out 100 pupa, right? And you count how many mites are reproducing, and then 16% of mites are already not reproducing on average. And so that's what you base your numbers off of, right? Is that correct?
Yep. So that's exactly right. I'm glad you said that. Like the 16% is like if you just went and pulled out all the mites and looked at them in nature, about 16% of them don't reproduce for some
Yeah.
reason. You know, just like some people can't have babies, some cows or any kind of organism can't reproduce. It happens. So about 16% is normal. Anything over 16%,
Yeah.
bees are doing something. And whenever, like, a lot of them, the ones that I test, not all of them, of course, but a large proportion of them will allow 0 mites to reproduce. So, I mean, you might find 5 mites in a sample, but no babies, no babies, no babies, no babies. That's suppressed mite reproduction. 100%. So that would be a 4. On that Harbo.
Wait, so what's a 5 then?
There isn't
Oh,
one.
there is no, okay. I thought it
It's a
went to
1
5.
to 4 scale. A 4 is
Okay.
100% suppressed mite reproduction. Or Scott Famous, he's got that queen breeder forum online on Facebook. He coined the term FSMR, fully suppressed mite reproduction. Ooh, I like that. That's pretty sweet. So yeah, they allow 0 mites to reproduce, and coincidentally, they're super viral resistant. So that's why they survive better. But you could have really good ones, or you could have crappy ones that are mean or whatever.
Yeah.
So use your beekeeper selection and pick colonies you actually like too, and because you can have your cake and eat it too if you make the right moves. I've seen it.
So in those cells, it doesn't matter how many mites you found, it matters how many mite babies you found. Is that correct?
Yep. Like, for instance, one of the ones I did, I found 5 non-reproductives. So just think about that. That's in a 100 sample. So like if you're doing an alcohol wash, 300 bees. So multiply that by 3. I didn't wash it, but if I found 5 in 100, it wouldn't surprise me if it was like a 15 wash. If you alcohol washed them. But the thing is, it was a 100% suppressed mite reproduction. So like, I don't base my breeding data off of mite washes because I think it's a good metric, but then I've also seen it be wrong.
Yeah.
Like in that instance, I would have killed a fully suppressed mite reproduction colony where they allowed 0%, but they were getting a load probably because they were robbing somebody or something. I don't know.
Yeah. It might not have even been a high mite load because, we say treat it, 3 or 6 bees, which is only 1 to 2%, but the vast majority of the bees are under the or mites are under the cappings. So even if they did have, so it might not, my guess is it'd be within threshold, even possibly under the cappings. Yeah,
that is true. I was just thinking if they immediately came out, because we like to do nurse bees.
Yeah.
Theory, of course, not. But I was thinking if they just immediately came out and you grabbed them, it could be 15 possibly. But anyway, that's just
conjecture.
Could have been a one-off, who knows?
Yeah. So I think your famous Cory method is getting some traction on YouTube with how to install queens. So I figured we should talk about that.
It works really well.
So I just figured, I heard it, but why do you sell virgins? What makes it best for you? And how do you suggest they introduce them? I hear your method's quite effective. Rumor has it.
Yeah, it is quite effective. And I've learned from a lot of pain and suffering. It took me a little while to figure that out. So hopefully I can save someone some of that pain. Why do I sell virgins? Well, there's multiple reasons or advantages for virgin queens. Like if I ship cells are cheaper. But if they miss delivery, because I ship them when they're coming out the next day, they're dead.
Yeah.
And I guarantee they're goners. I have to either eat the shipment, which is what I do. I guarantee live delivery. If it doesn't show up, something happens, I just replace it. Where with virgins, they're in candy cages. They miss delivery. They're fine.
No big deal. Yeah.
Exactly. Show up the next day and everybody's happy.
Yeah.
profitability is a big one because
Yeah.
Rainier knows if you're making a nuke, you're adding a queen cell. Like Bob says, which is what I was doing, I would let them set 3, even some of them were in there a month. So obviously they're super high quality
Yeah.
queens. They've been in there so long, and then I would sell them. So the time investment, and I would sell them for 30. This was back in the day. I don't know what you were selling them for.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're getting a good price. But there's just so much to that labor wise, and I was into genetics and I wanted to do breeders, so I got to where I would only sell queen cells and virgins. And but the thing too is, whenever if I do my work where I'm selling VSH virgins, regardless of what she mates with, at wherever she's making VSH drones because they're all unfertilized, and you get a localized hybrid immediately. The workers, like if I sent you some, it would be
Yeah.
50% Cory VSH. The drones would be all VSH, so they're going to affect your local population.
Yeah.
And the workers are 50% your bees that do well in Maine, or if you're in Georgia or Florida, wherever.
Yeah.
So you get kind of a localized hybrid. And
You
as
get that
far as
mix. Yeah.
you get a good mix, exactly, and you get hybrid vigor. Like Ian liked this reference because he's a
Cattle
cow
farmer. Yeah.
guy, exactly. But they taught us in animal science, if you have a Charolais bull and you've got Angus cows, you get heterosis or hybrid
Yeah.
vigor. So they're just sturdier. So you're probably getting some hybrid vigor too because they're not related stock.
At all. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yep. And so how I introduce them is you can either do, they have to think they're queenless for 7 to 9 days. You can pull it above an excluder, make sure your pull brood above an excluder,
Yeah.
make sure your queen's below it. They think the top box is queenless because she can't walk around up there. This is cell builder territory we're getting
Yeah.
into. But you can wait 7 to 9 days and there's no larvae that they can still use to make a queen out of. That's the hang up. So for instance, it's an egg for 3 days. Then it's the perfect age larvae on day 4. Day 5, they'll make a queen out of 48-hour-old larva. She's not going to be a good one, but they'll do it. 6, probably not going to happen. And just because I'm not a betting man and I want to know for sure, I wait till day 7, and I know for sure they have nothing they can make a queen out of. So between day 7 and day 9 is when you need to cut those cells and then add your virgin queen. Or you could make a split and add your virgin queen immediately, but you make sure she can't get out of her cage. So like tape or cap over the candy.
Yeah.
And then wait your remainder of your 7 to 9 days, then cut cells, then let her candy release so she won't be out till tomorrow.
Yeah, I talked about it. I made a video yesterday about, queen acceptance. Like, I feel like a lot of people don't understand the factors that go into it. I feel like so many queens are murdered at the altar of queenless colonies that people are waiting for a queen to come back. She never comes back because, 20% of them never do. Then they drop in a queen and then they get killed because there are only old bees left in that hive. And it's just same result over and over.
It's so common too.
Yeah.
I mean, but it is what it is, but you're exactly right. And so that's the thing with that method is it works for queen cells because I've made fresh splits and added viable queen cells and had them kill my cells, tear them down, and raise their own. So that happens. So anyway,
Yeah.
if you do that where you hit that hopelessly queenless is what I call it, but they still have
Yeah.
open brood and regular brood. It works for cells, virgins, open mated queens, and especially for like freshly inseminated queens, which can be difficult to introduce at times. So it works for
Yeah.
all of them.
It seems like a way that you're able to, I don't know if hedge your bet's the right word, but you're able to create a situation, using the bees biology and what they naturally do to cultivate the result that you want.
You're aligning your goals with theirs, and if
Exactly.
you can figure that out, beekeeping is way more fun. Otherwise, you're just fighting battles and they're fighting you, and it's just not fun. But you were talking about biology there. That's
Yeah.
another reason I noticed that method I came up with is so effective. I realized that it mirrored nature, and that was after I'd fought it and figured it out. But then
Yeah.
you think about this, like if your colony is about to swarm, what does the old queen do before she leaves?
Stops laying eggs. Yeah.
Stops
Shrinks down.
laying,
Yeah.
and she shrinks down. Yeah, her ovaries shrink, so she's getting in ready to fly. Well, as this is progressing, those larvae are aging out.
Yep.
So this isn't every time, but they're in an advanced swarming state. But a lot of the times when those virgins start coming out, there's no eggs, there's no young larvae. They'll be open brood, but that's exactly what we were creating with the Stevens method of virgin queen introduction, which works for all queens. Like I said, I guess I shouldn't
Yeah.
call it virgin queen intro, but historically,
Anything. Yeah.
people fought virgins trying to get them introduced because it was difficult. Like Dan Purvis, Bob Benny talked about doing some cool breeding projects with him, and I was talking to Dan when he was in Colorado. We were at his house, and I was telling him what I was up to. He's like, "Oh man, virgins." It's like if you come up with a way to get virgins introduced reliably, you'll be a rich man. And like I'm still waiting on that, Dan. I'm not rich. My pickup truck's an '09. Maybe it'll change. Who knows?
We'll get a GoFundMe going, Cory.
Okay. Just buy queens. That way you'll get something out of the deal.
All right. So can you so this goes back to what we were just talking about. Can you introduce a mated queen to a hopelessly queenless split just as successfully?
Absolutely. Yeah. But everybody knows that mated queens are easier to introduce because they have that full pheromone profile.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And this goes back to what you're talking about, is knowing the dynamics of what's going on in there. Once you stick a mated queen in there,
Yep.
everybody, the laying workers, their ovaries are suppressed. Their urge to make queen cells,
Yeah.
which are causing problem, is suppressed. Not always 100% though. So
No.
the Flower Streets question, absolutely, that hopelessly queenless is a phenomenal way to introduce open mated queens. But even with open mated queens, I wouldn't candy release them. Where you just put them in there and let them release. I would hold them and I would wait like 4 days, 5 days, and go back in there and look. And if there's no queen cells, you can tell how they're acting too. You can just let her out. But one of my buddies was telling me he had a mated queen in there. He went back after 4 days or so, had queen cells, cut them all, went back a couple days later, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if they made more or what, but they still wanted to kill her. So he waited a few more days and went back. They loved her. Everybody was happy. But
flip the switch. Yep.
Yeah, but if he candy released it, she'd have been, like you said, hopelessly murdered. Yeah. There goes 30 or 40 bucks.
Like in the video, and I was explaining some what a honey super is, and I was like, it's a box beekeepers plan to have honey in, but the bees don't always agree with our plans.
Very true.
Yeah, and I think it's the same thing with that. Like for me, I was always so antsy to get those queens out and get them laying, whether it was a package or a split or whatever it was. But the longer I'm a beekeeper, the more I realize there is no reason to take that risk. That is not a good idea.
Yeah, especially if it's just a couple day thing.
Yeah.
Like I tell some people how to introduce virgins because this wasn't common knowledge before I started figuring this stuff out. I think some people maybe had it where they knew kind of what to do, but I've never read it in a book. Like if I said I told it to Bob Benny and he looks at me like I have two heads. So that's how this isn't common knowledge. But after you figure that part out, it's just you can get stuff reliably introduced so much better. It's just your success rate goes up. You're still going to have some one-offs where she went in the wrong colony or got picked off by a bird or who knows what. But yeah, you'll get a lot better take.
Yeah, and to that end with the queen introduction, like for me, so I want to requeen all my hives every year. And so what I use is like I got, especially because I didn't get to requeening them till the dearth, I
Mhm.
used pushing cages on all of them. And I think I requeened 5, 6, 7 of them, and I only lost one, and that was because the pushing cage didn't go in the comb right. So that is a like if you're an advanced beekeeper that feels they can handle queens, that is a dynamite method of introducing them.
I couldn't agree more, honestly. If I have a problem breeder queen that I'm trying to
Oh
introduce,
yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what it is about that. I think it's because they can walk around on the comb
Yep.
and like those nurse bees that are coming out under there with them, are probably
Yeah.
spreading their pheromones around. But I second that. That is such a good method.
It's night and day difference. And the bees, like the only issue I'd find if you're doing it during the dearth, you want to feed before you do it, so you got some food to put her under to make sure she doesn't starve. But like I think on the Better Bee website it says leave it for like 3 to 4 days, and I'm thinking, nah, I'm waiting a week. If there's enough food under there, I'm not releasing them that soon. And I think it was a really interesting study. I think Bob Binney talked about it. The reason why that pushing cage helps so much is because she's laying, and that's what the bee is accepting. They went from having a laying queen to not a laying queen, right? And
Yeah,
so I think it was these scientists in Australia. They did a test where they moved like 100 queens. They just switched the queens from hives, switched them, and I think it was like almost every single attempt, they came back, they looked at the marks on the queens, they were the same exact queens.
that's
And
insane.
so since they replaced a laying queen with another laying queen, they accepted them nearly every single time.
Interesting. It's something about those queens that are laying those pheromones just
Yeah.
suppressing their urge to make queen cells, and it's like you just they accept her as reproductive, and we're
Yeah.
good. We got a good queen. Everything's good.
It's night and day difference. And
Oh
it's
yeah.
really interesting to me, like that pheromone profile is so important, and that they're laying. It's there's a reason why they don't get accepted, and that's because beekeeping's only been around for so long, and bees, they never made a split with a mated queen before, like other than a swarm, like they were never introduced to new queens randomly. So it's
Yep.
it's byproducts of beekeeping, and so I think it's fascinating that we're able to find out the reasons why it can work and improve our results.
Yeah. Definitely.
It's yeah, it's I don't know. It's always exciting to me. Like some nights I literally can't fall asleep. I'm just thinking about bees. I'm planning the season in my head. I got 6 months of winter. I got plenty of time to think about it. And some nights I just can't go to sleep.
Understand. Now me, I'm old, so I go to sleep. But if I'm awake, thinking about bees.
Yeah. So, comment from DC's Bees. One thing that I did when I introduced the queen last year, late season, I moved the hive, stripped it of most of the field bees, and she had way less grumpy bees to convince.
Yep.
Great idea. I mean, hats off to you, DC. It's like the meanest colonies. I think this will work great. I did it on one of my colonies. I wasn't successful because I still couldn't find that shifty queen. But if you move them away, you're not dealing with the foragers,
Yep.
and you got way less bees to convince they want a new queen.
Yep, that is true. Yeah, those young bees, they're just not aggressive at all. Like if
No.
you're watching and you see a queen start getting bald, it is always those old crusty grumpy workers every single time.
Those
So yeah,
damn
that's a good approach there.
those old foragers. They ruin everything.
The only way to change their mind is to wait 7 or 9 days,
Yeah.
cut those cells out, and every single bee in that hive then changes their mind. But if they
Yep.
have something they can make a queen out of, no,
Yeah,
too high risk.
yeah. I mean, I it's just really interesting to me. So I was watching one of your videos, and it was talking about, so like I always try to grab the fuzzy bees, but how do you know? So you were choosing the bees that weren't fuzzy. They were nurse bees that had just hatched, but they were nice and fat
God,
because they just eaten before they were feeding the larvae. So how do you figure out which of those bees? Because I'd like to do that myself, but I have no idea how to figure out which ones.
man,
Which
that's a
ones?
killer question, and I think that's what a lot of people have problems with. Putting queens in cages with attendants is they're not getting the right stuff. So if you just hear people talk, they'll say grab nurse bees.
Yeah.
No, but people think of nurse bees, they think of the little fuzzy ones that are just coming out. But the thing is,
Yeah.
though, is they've been like they were fed a bunch, but as they're changing from a pupa into a bee, they're burning energy and that they're not eating anything. So
Yeah.
when they hatch, they're like famished. They want something to eat. So those are nutritionally deficit. And you should talk to Natalie about this because she's a natural when it comes to picking these out. I showed her one time. I'm like, look here, and here's the ones you want. Here's why. And she sat there, and I was talking to Dawn and Chris, and she
Yeah.
sat there and like filled the whole bar, and we were putting 6 in each one because I'm an overachiever. And she just sat there and hammered them out. But back to what we were saying. So if you grab an open brood frame where they're feeding young larvae, just stop for a minute and look at the bees that are crawling around on there. You're going to see some little fuzzies like you saw that are brand new that have just come out. And then you're going to see some worker bees where their abdomen, their butts are just big. Those are the ones that are just gorging themselves on because they're having to feed this high quality food, from their hypopharyngeal glands to the new brood. So they're ready to feed something. That's the ones you want. And that's, like I saw him talking online about how fast queens will die in an incubator, and like, I'm like, oh man, I've had them in there over 3 weeks or better, not on purpose, but just some I'd ended up not using. And if you have good attendance, you have good candy, and you water them once a day. If you leave out that third one, they're toast. I can keep them for weeks. Yeah, DC's bees, full tummies. Yeah, don't go for the nurse bees. I'm so glad he asked that question. That was gold.
Yeah. Because I always, it makes a lot of sense because those bees, like actually when they first hatch, they're not actually nurse bees. They clean out their cell first. That's not even their first job really, is to be a nurse bee. It's a couple days after when they have that nurse bee stage from, I think it was like 4 to 12 or 15 or somewhere in there in their development. And so it makes a lot of sense. And yeah, if you hadn't been fed in, 10 or 12 days, it makes sense you'd be a little bit malnourished. And you've
exactly. You don't have anything to give to her, it's better than nothing, but not good. And yeah, the thing is too, is I go into any queen right colony. Most people think, sometimes I'll use a cell builder, but most of the time I just open up any colony that's got a good queen in it. And if you grab those ones that have gorged themselves that are actual nurse bees, they will almost never attack the queen. Once in a while, I'll have a queen kill a worker.
What?
Had a bad day. Yeah. I don't know. But usually, rarely, it's the other way around if you're getting quality attendance. If they're attacking your queens, you're getting way old bees, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah. So I saw this in your video, but I want to confirm with you. So if I'm, pulling queens and I happen to walk away and I'm not sure which colony I pull, what mating nuke I pull her out of, if I go in to any random one, and as long as I pick the right age bee, 99% of the time she'll be accepted and she won't be
I
bald,
would
right?
say 99.9999.
Okay.
And it's that solid. And you can ask Natalie about it too if you get the chance. I mean, it's crazy though, because like most people in my family won't even, you have to sit there barehanded. Like you can't have your big gloves on and grab these things because how you're doing it is, the bees are on this frame. You actually kind of press them down just a little bit and then grab both of their wings. You can do it with one, but you want to get them in there quick because you might get lit up. But if you grab those two, I mean, you can just sit there, just fluidly move. Like I said, Natalie's a natural at it. She'll be catching a lot of those, I think.
I got stung. I think I only got stung twice last summer doing that.
Good.
So I felt pretty good about myself,
Yeah, for sure. Hey, I have to give you props for doing that because I know there's beekeepers that have kept bees for 30 years that have never pulled their gloves off and started grabbing attendants. So you're ahead of your time.
I put on nitrile gloves, but I mean, it's more for me than for the bees because they sting right through it if they want to. So
There's a guy at our bee club. He said he has to wear nitriles because he started to get a rash from propolis, like he was starting to get allergic to it or something.
That's an odd one. I've never heard that. But
Yeah,
beekeepers always have a lot of stories, right?
that is true. Yeah, there's no shortage of that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll definitely think about that because I want to get the best attendance I can. I did have some that were dying out, but mostly that was the time where I couldn't find any like even new bees to put in the cage. But yeah, it's always interesting with queen rearing. You always see a lot of things.
Yeah,
There's
and trial and error. I mean, a lot of the stuff I figured out was from killing bees and doing stuff. You know,
school of hard knocks, I suppose.
it's a good lesson to learn.
You've been in it for 15 years, right?
Yep. So, yep, I've done a lot of stuff that I shouldn't have done. But that's how you learn. If you it's speaking from experience, like I said, rather than like I kept talking about queen rear, and I read this book, and I read this book, and I read this
Yeah.
book at the bee club, and this guy, it was like my third year beekeeping. This guy's like, "Put the books down." It was Neil in his big Minnesota accent. "Put the book down and just go do it." I'm like, he's exactly right. Like, I mean, you can read every book you want to, which is a good idea.
Yeah,
Kind of know what you're getting into, but then you just got to get your hands dirty, or else it's
absolutely.
incomplete.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time, Cory. I'll link your website and your YouTube channel down below. People can buy virgins and inseminated queens from you. Really appreciate you coming on. I think it was a great talk, and I'm glad you're able to come out tonight.
Me too. Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for coming on.
Always enjoy a good bee conversation.
Absolutely. Who doesn't? All right. Have a good night. Thank you, Cory.
Thank you.
Bye.